I think, one of the things that is on like the forefront of many people's minds is trying to keep up with the pace of AI and technology at present, because things are seriously changing at a significant pace at the moment.
Yeah.
It, it seems like a week will go by and there'll be a new model that's launched. Yeah, so we're an international firm, and I'm based here over in the UAE. We deal in dispute resolution, across the board. So typically arbitration and preparation, expert witness work. We do project sort of claims for contractors or for employers. I'm a CEDA accredited mediator.
Okay.
So most forms of ADR, alternative dispute resolution, we deal with. We're not lawyers, so we can't give legal advice. We support throughout the process, really. What we've got at the moment is essentially a new form of intelligence that a lot of the creators don't really even know whether it's conscious. I
Yeah.
think Ilya Sutskever, for example, has sort of declared that he doesn't know whether there is consciousness in these things. So that in itself is a huge sort of concept.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Flux podcast. I'm here joined by Yoshi as usual, and with us is Robert Dean. Robert is an associate director at Dialis. He's based in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi. And Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And I have to say, I heard a podcast that you did with a good friend of Project Flux podcast, Paul Hemming, who runs the On the Build podcast a few months ago. And it was a brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I thought I had to connect with you. And you kindly agreed to come on to talk about particularly dispute resolution and arbitration and how AI is going to impact that. So I'm really pumped, really excited about this conversation. Yeah, how are you? How's life in Abu Dhabi at the moment?
Oh, it's all good, thanks. It's the weather's still good over here. It's a good time of year, and slightly shorter days at the moment as it's Ramadan.
Oh, of course,
So
yeah.
so it gives me a bit more time to do stuff after hours work wise. So it's all good. But yeah, pleasure to be here. It was a great conversation that Paul and I had a few weeks back, and AI and dispute resolution are both topics that I'm interested in, and looking forward to talking with you guys about.
Excellent. And it's funny, isn't it? It was only a few weeks ago, but things have moved on since then. And I think you're quite active on LinkedIn as well. You do some really engaging posts. So we'll share your LinkedIn with all the listeners so that they can connect with you and hear some of your views. But we will cover that today. But before we get into kind of the technical stuff, I always like to sort of ask our guests, what's on your mind right now? What's the big thing that's keeping you up at night, or the big question you're trying to answer at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that is on like the forefront of many people's minds is trying to keep up with the pace of AI and technology at present, because things are seriously changing at a significant pace at the moment.
Yeah.
It seems like a week will go by and there'll be a new model that's launched that varying capabilities to previous sort of generations. And I'm not sure about yourselves, but I tend to find myself sort of jumping between the different models
Yeah.
for different tasks. But you take, for example, the latest release from Anthropic with Sonnet 3.7 versus OpenAI's 4.5. For me, I was probably going through a period where I would be using the OpenAI models more, and I've sort of found more recently with this update from Anthropic that actually for most of my use cases presently, that is actually the stronger, sort of more consistent model.
That's interesting because I was listening to somebody else talking the other day about we're starting to have this divergence of people becoming Claude people or ChatGPT people, and you kind of almost defend it because you feel that that's your camp. But I think it is important to do what you're doing and go and use different models for different use cases, because they're all always emerging and always changing. But it's interesting that you're finding Claude quite interesting. I really like the model, but I find the lack of the web browsing. I don't think it's got that capability yet. one of the stumbling blocks.
Yeah, that is true. It doesn't have the web browsing. It's only recently got the extended thinking with the reasoning sort of mode
Yeah,
to it. From a coding perspective, I think its outputs are generally better and more efficient. If you want it to produce you a script or something maybe to help in your day-to-day stuff that you're doing. The web browsing side of things, I tend to find that more like of a personal sort of preference. And for me, I use Perplexity mainly for
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's
I
brilliant.
know that OpenAI have got it embedded, haven't they now? But I tend to still use Perplexity for
Yeah.
most of the.
Yeah, so you jump around the model. That's exactly what I do. But I think there will come a time because I kind of remember back in when the internet browser started, you wouldn't use different browsers for different reasons. And I think even though we get really interested in it because we're in the space, and I think it's actually a barrier to entry for your kind of average person who's not into this. They find it quite confusing. So I think they've got to fix it as well. Actually, I don't know
Yeah,
what you think about that.
yeah. I think, I mean, the industry is still in its infancy, and I think as things sort of progress, there will be aggregation of these sort of things. And the fact that, I mean, Perplexity, for example, are currently building a browser, so I imagine that will bring in AI agents and whatnot into your general workflow of browsing the internet.
Yeah,
And some of the institutions innovate in certain ways, and then other ones tend to sort of copy them. And
yeah, yeah,
and between them all, I think it will converge into something that's a lot more user friendly than the current setup. But presently, it is fairly important to sort of keep a pace of the developments within the models and to understand where their key strengths lie, to sort of make it makes sense. If you want to have the edge in what you're doing, you basically need to be able to understand where the strongest one is going to be. And if, for example, you're using it for a coding point of view, you need to be keeping ahead of which model's better. But
yeah,
like I say, the difficulty is you can only read so many blogs and listen to so many podcasts, can't you? But
yeah.
I think if you have
Well,
a good
just
a
listen to
good
the Project
source.
Flux one, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, true.
That's what we're, but in all seriousness, that's exactly why we set this up. Like it was because it was quite confusing and we try and simplify because you're right, there's lots of blogs out there and there's lots of podcasts, but a lot of them are quite technical. And that's the gap that we're trying to fill really for project people, people in project delivery to simplify it and kind of condense it down into something that they can all understand. And just hearing people like yourself talk about your experiences is really important for our listeners. And we haven't actually had somebody who's in sort of dispute resolutions. So before we go into kind of more detail about some of the technical questions, tell us a little bit about what Dialis does and how perhaps you're using AI within Dialis.
Yeah, so we're an international firm, and I'm based here over in the UAE. We deal in dispute resolution, across the board. So typically arbitration and preparation, expert witness work. We do project sort of claims for contractors or for employers. I'm a CEDA accredited mediator.
Okay.
Most forms of ADR, alternative dispute resolution, we deal with. We're not lawyers, so we can't give legal advice. We support throughout the process, really. And yeah, so
So
and
as a
I've
QS myself, as a background as QS, so I got involved in a lot of sort of construction claims and stuff. I can see huge potential with these artificial intelligence to reduce conflict in the industry. I don't think by any means it's anywhere near being taken up. But do you agree with that statement? Do you think it could be a force for good?
Yeah, it definitely could be a force for good. And I think inevitably, that these forms of intelligence are going to be embedded into like the key tools that are used on site, and they're only going to get better. I think presently, um, the variants won't be necessarily as intelligent. So it's going to take a while for, let's say, for example, an Aconex has it baked into their systems so
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
you can use summaries and all this sort of stuff. I
Do you
think
think
it
that's
will.
coming though? Do you
I
think
do
that's
think
a
it's coming. Yeah, I think it's fairly inevitable. I think a lot of the big software companies will want to be seen to be staying ahead of the curve with these things, and there won't necessarily be in-house models because a lot of the contractors and whatnot probably won't go training their own AIs anytime soon, but there'll be tools within the software suites that are currently available that that I see will, I think will almost certainly be embedding this technology into it. And
Mm,
as it catches up with the sort of more generalist models, like for example a Claude or a OpenAI equivalent, they will only get smarter and more used in a day in and day out basis. But with that becomes the question of accuracy and the hallucinations, and the fact that people presently need to be aware of the shortfalls of using this technology, and
definitely.
the requirements to double check the outputs of it. How that sort of transitions, I'm not too sure, but yeah, I do think it will make a big difference to disputes as a whole. Whether or not it helps avoid them potentially, or it might help create them. Because certain things are sped up by the process.
That's
So
true. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, you could look at it from both sides, really, I think.
Yeah. Well, I've used it myself to get off a parking ticket, but
Right.
I'm sure there's plenty of people doing things like that. So the ability to have something, if you want to do something quite mundane like that, a small claim, like something, you're in dispute with it, whatever it may be. It gives people the power to do things that they wouldn't have had before. They would have had to pay a fortune for legal advice. And that's a really, it's a silly example, but it's also a true example. I was able to write my response utilizing AI, which could then cite all the kind of legal precedents that I needed to cite, etc. To do that, I wouldn't have been able to do that really without either loads and loads of research or paying some kind of legal professional to do it. And yeah, it resulted in me getting off it.
All
So
right. Well, there you go.
I was right,
The
by the way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I've got a question, a follow-up question, Rob, because in dispute resolution, we typically have two or multiple parties having a dispute, and you guys will come in as the voice of reason. Primarily, when ChatGPT first came out, and you had these more traditional LLMs, you had these models which can reference clauses very well. They might hallucinate, but they can do well at referencing certain clauses. Like James mentioned, you have these citation precedences. Now, with the new reasoning models, can you actually use that in the way that they're actually designed? So you can actually use a reasoning model to reason through your disputes. Do you use that traceability of chain of thought to actually inform the advice you give?
So I guess firstly, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't tend to quote legal things, in what I do, and I don't use the technology, in my work in that respect either. So I can't completely say with confidence, whether the new reasoning models would in fact be able to solve that problem. I suspect that given the volume of the data and the fact that in a contract you typically would have things cross-referencing other things, you most definitely would need something with a strong reasoning capability. And I think in their present form, I think they're not probably there yet. I think the lawyers can sort of rest easy for the time being. For any sort of complex scenario. I mean, not necessarily something like a parking ticket per se, but if it was a big complicated contract in a scenario, I think you would almost certainly want a model that could basically read one thing and then be able to jump back and forth between other things.
Mm.
That it's coming. That's the thing. The sort of reasoning capabilities of these models presently are, I think, about 50% of the way there to human
Yeah,
reasoning, depending on which benchmarks that you sort of prescribe to. But yeah,
it's moving
it's
fast though, isn't it? Those
it
benchmarks are
is
going
it
up
is
all the time.
incredibly fast. Yeah, it's moving incredibly fast. Yeah.
It makes you think as well, though, because now that some of these models are becoming less impartial, because the big tech are finding it very hard to actually have models which are completely objective. It makes you start to question the suitability of using them because it's not coming from an objective ground, right? It then starts to lean on either side, and I wonder how that would play out depending on how you prompt.
Well, this is it, and this is why it's incredibly important that people are aware of how to use these models, their shortcomings, and how to get the best out of them, From a prompting perspective, the whole rubbish in, rubbish out scenario is very relevant. And I think, being able to describe what you need and to be able to give the models the appropriate sort of content to begin with is incredibly important. And I think a lot of the time, the work that you do up front is almost the most important component to it. So cleaning your data and making sure that what's in there is relevant. Certainly if you're dealing with a model with a restricted context window, so something that can only necessarily handle so many 100 pages, you're dealing with a scenario where you have project data, for example, that's like 500 pages long. There is a process whereby you'll need to essentially remove non-relevant components to that, and how you get that in. Is it from a scanned document on site that the quality isn't particularly great, and the output of that generates a load of characters that aren't actually useful to the context window, so it's almost wasted.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that you basically, that the time is spent up front and understanding, that how much you would improve the output of these things, of these processes from spending the time sort of cleaning your data properly.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, the people who kind of come to me and say, "Oh, I've tried, these models and they don't work." It's because of the prompt, right? And it's because they're not putting the work in up front. It does require some thinking about what you want to get out of it, and like you say, the content and the context of what you put in is so important. And it is rubbish in, rubbish out. If you put a very simple prompt without much context, without a role, without kind of what your output you want it to give you, then you should expect a really poor answer. But if you give it all those things, you give it the context, you give it the role, you ask it to interview you, and you actually tell it what you want it to produce and how you want it to be structured, then you can expect a pretty good response, is the way I see it. But just turning towards like not just lawyers, but the professions as a whole, right? One of my favorite books, I'm not sure if you read it, Rob, is The Future of the Professions by the Suskins.
I haven't read it, no.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book, which I always recommend. And they came from the law space, but they actually applies to all professions, including surveying and including management consultancy, et cetera, et cetera. And what they really say is, yeah, in the medium term, we're going to have AI basically augment a lot of what we do, which is what we're seeing at the moment, I think. But in the longer term, it is going to absolutely fundamentally change workflows, because at the moment we're kind of digitizing or augmenting the workflows that we do and trying to squeeze AI into those spaces. But where it's inevitably going to go, they say, is that it's going to change the workflows, actually, because why would we do it like this in the first place? Do you agree with that statement, or do you think they're slightly wide of the mark?
No, I think I do agree with it. Timescales is probably the question, isn't it? It's how long is it going to take, and it is. The answer is quite varied. You listen to what some of the CEOs of Anthropic or OpenAI have said, and I think Dario Amodei from Anthropic, I think his sort of thesis is basically it's a couple of years away. Yeah, and certainly the sort of pace that we're presently seeing and the advances in reasoning capability, of late, it does suggest that time frame is probably accurate. But there are bottlenecks in the scenario, and compute and energy, and the whole question of how these things are governed will play part in that. And it's going to be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, I think workflows will certainly see an augmentation using LLM agents, if you will. And allegedly this is the year that these agents are going to come into play. I'm sure you've seen, James, one of the more recent announcements from the OpenAI team was basically that they're bringing out PhD level agents that they're going to charge circa $20,000 a month or something for access to. So they clearly believe that the technology is there, is advanced enough to be able to charge those sort of fees. And
well, the thing is, it sounds a lot right, but if you're replacing the management consultants you're spending money on at the moment, which would be charging a lot more than that, then it's a steal.
I mean, I don't think anything technical that involves multiple steps, that you're dealing with sort of complexity, I don't really see that dropping away anytime soon. I think, there's going to be humans in the loop, and I think that society as a whole wants that. I don't think we're going to necessarily want to put ourselves in a place where we're no longer required. I think, certainly from like bringing it into like a construction perspective, building is a very physical thing, and it's not so much an IT thing. It's the real world. I mean, yeah, of course, it generates a lot of data, and we need tools to help us do things more efficiently. But it's inherently a collaborative process that involves humans to humans. And I don't really see a lot of job displacement until the robots come. And
Well, funny enough, we
when
covered that in the last podcast, because the first commercially available one, it's not the Figure one, it was the Unitree one. That's
yeah.
so you're going to be able to buy a robot very, very soon. And obviously it's very early days, but for $16,000, and it's like, okay, it sounds a lot of money, but again, it's cheaper than a decent car. So I don't think we're too far away from that.
I don't think we are either. That's the truth of
Scary,
it.
isn't
And
it?
yeah, the text-based and the vision-based models
Yeah.
that exist today are basically helping to train them, aren't they? And to speed that up. So what would have taken hundreds of thousands of hours in the real world is essentially being done in minutes in a virtual
Exactly.
environment, and then just dropped into these machines that are
You
able
were saying
to.
the other day, you
Yeah.
said the other day, Rob, that what was interesting about the robots and how they're training these new models is it's not just goal-directed behavior. So they're reframing even when the robots have accidents like knocking over a cup into learning. So they're learning through perception, not just goal-directed behavior, and I think that's going to be a really interesting point as well, because just seeing that evolution in terms of how something learns, it simulates kind of how we learn. It's very similar, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you've got the whole idea. I mean, you say constructions are very human and you need humans at the moment doing the building, but actually, the potential for robotics on site is really exciting, because of course that's the bottleneck in construction. We don't have enough skilled labor. We have a terrible sort of, well, not good enough health and safety records, and of course humans need to sleep and they need to eat and they need to do all those things, those pesky habits that get in the way of productivity. So do you see these AI powered robots coming onto site at some point?
Yeah, I think they'll be there eventually, but we need to build the factories into scale and all that sort of
Yeah,
stuff first. So I think it won't be anytime soon,
yeah,
but it will happen.
it
It's
will
just a
happen.
case of
Yeah. Well, I told my wife already I want to get our robot, because I got my eldest son off to university soon. So I said, well, look, we can replace him and all his chores with a robot. She didn't buy it. Don't worry about it. But yeah, one day I'll get my way. You mentioned agents there and agentic stuff, which is obviously the big topic of 2025. Have you had any experience with agents, or like doing autonomous tasks yet, or is that something that you just kind of read about rather than actually
Yeah, I
interact
have
with?
had experience with it. Yeah, so sort of in my spare time, I sort of volunteer for a blockchain-based project called Claros.
Yeah.
And they deal with sort of on-chain dispute resolution. It's quite a unique sort of process. It's based on sort of game theory, and
Hmm.
it doesn't really mirror anything that exists in traditional dispute resolution. But it's incredibly smart stuff, and the team are great over there. And I've got quite close to them over the years. The sort of president of Claros and I sort of teamed up to build a mediator agent that
Oh wow.
essentially, yeah, I mean, it was it was well over a year ago, maybe even two. It was it
You're,
was it
you're
was it
cutting
was
edge.
yeah, it was before GPT-4 anyway. I've forgotten the exact date, but yeah, we basically built a workflow on the OpenAI infrastructure, basically to funnel in disputes into Claros, and it was using a system whereby if you engaged in a mediation and the mediation wasn't successful, that it would present options to the parties that basically would give them the ability to potentially push the dispute to Claros for jurors to vote on the
That's
outcome.
fantastic. Very good. So it actually had that autonomous action, because that's my definition. People say, what's an agent? It's like, you've got the custom GPTs that you can build, but that's not an agent because it has to take an autonomous action at the end. So the fact that it, then delivered to you some advice or, next steps, I think is quite important. That's amazing. So you are well ahead of the curve.
I'm trying to
Trendsetter.
keep up with the curve. I'm trying to keep up with the curve.
I think we all are. Yoshi and I were at the Microsoft AI launch yesterday, the AI tour in Excel, and they were talking about their Copilot studio and, the fact that it's called Copilot, the worst naming convention I've ever heard. I think it was called Copilot Studio Plus Plus Agent or something. With, they need to work on their marketing somewhere. But,
You can't
they
even build the agents in the Copilot studio.
it's just mad. It's just mad for a company that big. They need to get a better marketing. But effective, they're bringing that ability for people to create agents to anyone who's got Copilot. So I still worry though that even though people are given the ability, most, like the vast majority of people without upskilling won't be able to use them properly.
Yeah, I mean, you really need to be able to use APIs and things like this that you can create workflows that dial into these various sort of different APIs. So, the Azure platform and what Microsoft are building it can be quite intimidating to sort of navigate. But one of the great things with these language models is you can ask them how to do things like this. They're great tutors, certainly like my coding abilities were not great, and yet I can now do most things that I want to be able to do, just having a basic understanding of the key structures
Yeah.
of how things work, and just trial and error with AI, asking, what this is the error code that it kicked out. Can you please help me correct my code? And boom, does.
Well, even I've been playing around with Replit. I don't know if you've had a chance to play with that. That you don't even need to do that. It will it will find the errors for you and then fix it in front of you. So the barrier to entry has come right down for anyone to be able to play around with coding, even with no coding experience at all,
Yeah,
which is really
absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah.
But I was very intrigued about something you said before about this organization that you're working with in terms of blockchain and stuff. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what they do, and then I'd like to talk to your opinion on smart contracts and where we're going with things like that.
Sure. Yes. Claros it's an Ethereum based project. They've bridged onto some of the layer 2 platforms, but yeah, they're very much Web3. They've been around for many years now. I think I first discovered them in probably 2018.
Yeah.
So they've been around the bush as far as crypto projects are concerned, and yeah, they work pretty closely with the universities. They've currently got a PhD place up for grabs in the UK with
Oh,
Oxford. Yeah, with Oxford University. So there's a number of sort of things in the calendar there this year. And yeah, they have like an escrow service that's sort of linked to their dispute resolution platform, and yeah, the concept is basically that people sign up as jurors, and you
right.
get drawn based on you holding their token, and it's a random selection. But yeah, there are different courts based on expertise, and yeah, I think most of the use cases they've had a few thousand sort of small Web3 related disputes put through their system, but what they're building can cater for most different sort of scenarios. What one of the popular courts is they're building like a curated list of blockchain addresses, so that when you're dealing with transactions on Web3, so if you're sending something to another wallet, their list will basically say if that wallet or address is linked to some existing list, or it helps sort of avoid scams or dodgy things like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
That it's kind of giving a bit of a more human face to just a load of numbers.
Yeah.
But yeah, in order for these things to be built in a decentralized way, it needs a decentralized dispute resolution backbone.
Okay.
So it's quite an integral part of an Ethereum system that you have a sort of mechanism where there is a dispute resolution process in blockchain. And
So specifically for this dispute resolution, this Kairos.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's for settling disputes in a blockchain environment. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds like.
They also use game theory within that then.
Yeah, they do. They use something called the Schelling point. I don't I don't know the maths all that great about it, to be honest. But yeah, it is quite a clever, a novel approach to take, and it certainly favors certain scenarios over other scenarios. And I don't necessarily see it replacing traditional forms of dispute resolution, but it's something that needs to exist for the web.
Does it require people to have a smart contract to enable that dispute resolution to take place, or can it take place even with it can be used even with traditional contracts, a dispute within a traditional contract?
I mean, going back to the mediation bridge scenario that I mentioned earlier, I mean, there are ways that you can basically create like hybrid scenarios where you bring things in from the real world on chain, and you can essentially chunk more complicated things down into things that jurors can vote on, that they don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time reviewing, because the whole system is really presently more geared towards low value, high volume disputes, and not necessarily churning through hundreds of pages of documentation to settle, and not necessarily requiring legal expertise, for example, to solve the problems. It's more of a case of sort of simplistic things. But the whole AI thing plays well into their favor, because it does help distill complexity. Obviously there's issues with bias and the extent that you rely on such tools to distill things down into summary form, but as we mentioned earlier, that's going to be something that we're going to need to handle as time goes on. But yeah, for scenarios where you want to get to the bottom of an issue fairly quickly, I think AI certainly helps that process. And then if you need humans in the loop to sort of give the final say on something, Kleros also provides that ability, paired with a proof of humanity sort of system, where that the people that are truly engaging in the voting are in fact genuine humans, not either agents, humans that have got more than one sort of web address, if you will.
Yeah, okay.
But
interesting.
yeah, I mean, they're all. I mean, I'm particularly interested in the stuff that they're doing, because I do see that as being quite a requirement moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it gets a bad rap, sort of blockchain, because of the connotations with crypto and the fact that can rise and fall. But in terms of agents, going back to autonomous agents, I see the blockchain as and crypto actually as the perfect kind of companion to these AI agents, because if they need to transact in any way, then it's going to be much easier to transact within the blockchain world with crypto than bringing it especially across multiple domains. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're not going to require permission to use credit cards, or an agent, for example, if it's on the blockchain and it's trading something like Bitcoin, for example, if it has, I mean, it's probably coming, autonomy over its own Web3 wallet. Then yeah, they will probably prefer that environment because it's permissionless and decentralized. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that goes, and how it takes off, and how much agents basically dominate block space. But I think inevitably we're going to need really robust proof of humanity systems that to keep society on track. That otherwise we're going to lose trust in what's real and what's been created by robots. We're going to be like, well, how do I know that another human has made this, or that another human has checked this, or things along the.
Yeah, especially with the rise of quantum computing now, because the whole basis of blockchain is indisputable and can't be cracked. But actually, with the quantum computing, potentially it could be, and then that puts the whole kind of concept of blockchain. Anyway, we're thinking slightly ahead, but bringing it slightly closer to home. How far away do you think we are of a construction contract being paid for or handled with cryptocurrency? Can you ever see a point where that crypto is used to make payments based on some kind of agent that does a valuation, and then it just goes through?
Maybe. I mean, never say never. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but it's certainly a possibility, isn't it? One day that may be the case.
Yeah.
I
the
think
way that technology is going, you can imagine someone going around site with one of these LiDAR scanners, measuring progress, and it's all put into the blockchain. The blockchain then, indisputably creates that whole valuation process, and then there'll be a human in the loop, I suppose, saying yes, I agree, and then the transaction takes place through crypto. I mean, especially for when you're going over multiple domains, you can see that could be quite enticing. I agree with you; it's quite a way away, but I can't see any reason why that can't be the goal.
Yeah, I think so. One thing that might come before that is sort of digital replicas being made a lot quicker and slicker that sort of track progress on site. Because a lot of the bottlenecks to BIM, for example, being extensively used, or it's because how many people it takes to maintain these things and the cost of them. But if essentially AI can build these models, based off just basic site data, and a lot of the rendering of all of the woody sort of models is done by machines. So that will seriously help speed up and make building more efficient. And when you look at the technology that exists that Google are doing with like video and computer games and things like this, and how they're essentially able to generate their own sort of worlds now that
Yeah.
AI can build and actually engage in.
It's incredible.
It's incredible, and that almost certainly will come to construction. I think probably before the robots or anything like that. I think that's probably one of the sort of opportunities
Yeah, I
for
agree.
us, really.
It's exciting times, definitely. We're coming towards the end of the podcast. I can't believe it's been a fascinating conversation. It's gone so fast. We like to kind of get people's opinions and recommendations also. Rob, I don't know, is there a book or a podcast or even an idea that shaped your thinking recently that you could recommend to the listeners?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I quite like machine learning street talk on YouTube. I don't know if you've come
Okay. No, I
across
haven't.
them. It's really good. It's super nerdy, and he's the guys that do it get some really good guests on.
Yeah.
That's one way that I sort of try and stay ahead of the curve.
I'll check that out for sure.
Yeah. They tend to be quite on the long side, but yeah, it's worth checking out.
There's so many good resources like that. It's like I find more and more stuff out, and you've got to obviously limit it because there's only so many hours in a day, and your screen time is also important. But that sounds like a really good one, and probably something that our listeners will be interested in. So I'll look that up and I'll put it in the show notes for people to follow.
Yeah,
And
sure thing.
one more question. What's because things are moving so fast, I find myself questioning a lot of thoughts and changing my mind. I think it's really healthy to change your mind about opinions that you had. So, is there a belief or opinion you've changed your mind about recently?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It might be no, but
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I think that's having a scientific mind is the best approach, isn't it, with these things? And
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, from an AI perspective, I guess, yeah, what have I changed my mind on recently? Uh, you know, I
But
Yeah, I mean, I
I,
guess actually, like, one of the biggest things is that back in the day, I didn't really think that we would really ever see anything quite as advanced as what we currently have in AI.
yeah, that's where I am.
That in itself, like, because wind the clock back 5 years, probably more, and everybody that had an algorithm was referring to it as AI, and it was kind of like, well, this isn't AI, this is just basic computing.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, what we've got at the moment is essentially a new form of intelligence that a lot of the creators don't really even know whether it's conscious. I
yeah,
think Ilya Sutskever, for example, has sort of declared that he doesn't know whether there is consciousness in these things. So that in itself is a huge sort of concept. It just goes to show the unknown element
it
to
is.
this,
It
and
is.
how it really truly is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, Yoshi and I were talking just the other day, weren't we, about, it's starting to shape my thinking in ways that I couldn't even imagine about spirituality and about, the meaning of life. We had quite a deep conversation, didn't we, mate?
Well, you said it made you more spiritual.
Yeah, and that's the surprising thing for me. That's why I asked you the question, Rob, because funnily enough, the fact that you can see some kind of consciousness emerging in front of you, because I'm playing with this so much, it's really got me questioning things in quite a spiritual sense, which I know not everyone will, but it's just such an interesting time to be alive, right?
Yeah, it certainly is, and I mean, I don't know if you've engaged with some of the voice models, and how realistic they are. It's kind of scary, really. How quickly that's come on.
There's a new one called Sesame that's come out that I tried out the other day.
All
That
right.
is the most human-like one I've tried. It's scary human. It's got the whole kind of vibe of talking to somebody. You know, the
Really?
ChatGPT one still feels that, yeah, it's really good. It's really good. So I don't
Yeah.
think the model underlying it is as good, but the actual kind of experience talking to it is really good. But Rob, listen, we've come to the end. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we could have gone on easily for another probably double what we've been talking about, but we do have to draw it to a close. Any kind of last words for you or anything else we've forgotten to mention?
No, thanks a lot. Thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, appreciate being invited onto the show.
Well, thank you so much, and hopefully you'll come back on soon before too long. But until then, thank you so much. We'll put all your links, your LinkedIn and your company, and the what was the organisation? Kiros, was it that you?
I work for Dialis, and
Yeah,
yeah, the Claros was just
Claros.
as a voluntary thing that I do on the
Yeah,
side
yeah,
in my spare time. But yeah, Claros, yeah, yeah.
excellent, brilliant. Thank you so much, Rob. Have a great week.
Cheers, thanks, guys.
Project Flux is here.
That's a wrap for today's episode. But before you go, exciting news. Project Flux is teaming up with Project Management Global to bring you the latest in AI driven project delivery and essential management insights. Through this partnership, expect weekly AI insights, practical tools, and expert thought leadership, ensuring you stay ahead in the evolving project landscape. Stay tuned for exclusive content, joint research, and strategies to supercharge your project outcomes. You can learn more at www.pm-global.co.uk and be part of the future of project management. See you later.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.